Welcome to the inaugural meeting of the Working Group on the Nuclear Disarmament Education. I'm Agnes Niemark, a visiting scholar and projects coordinator at the REPI Institute for Peace and Conflict Studies. It's my pleasure to moderate the meeting today. Professor Rebecca Slayton, the director of the REPI Institute, will join me in a moment in welcoming you and launching the work of our group. First, I would like to thank you all for joining the project. I'm very glad that we were able to bring such a diverse group of participants, and I hope we are going to learn from each other's experiences. Some of us know each other, as I said before, but not all of us. So the first goal for our meeting today is to introduce ourselves and our work as it relates to nuclear disarmament education. Our second goal for this meeting is to discuss what we can achieve as a group, all of us together. I will start by answering these questions for myself. I joined the REPI Institute in 2014, and from the very beginning, I had a chance to participate in the research project on stability at lower nuclear numbers, directed by two wonderful scholars, Judith Repi and Katrin Kalleher. I also work with Judith Repi on preserving the archive of Randall Forsberg, one of the leaders of the Freeze movement, and the institute that Randy established in 1979, the Institute for Defense and Disarmament Studies. So these archival projects helped me to understand the significance of the nuclear weapons freeze campaign of the 1980s and in general, nuclear disarmament movements. And also I understood how grassroots organizing in this field work and disarmament education on the US campuses in the 1980s. Over the last couple of years, I've conducted also oral histories for a documentary about nuclear disarmament and education as well. I have also been involved in, I've been following also closely since 2016, the ICANN campaign to ban the bomb. And also, all the developments related to the negotiations of the TPNW and its entry into force. And this is why I started to think that the TPNW provides an excellent platform to start the discussions on nuclear disarmament education. I think it is a good platform because it's open to a variety of stakeholders. We can easily involve in the sessions or meetings of the member state parties, civil society and youth and experts in nuclear disarmament, as well as the communities affected by nuclear testing and mining. So this is how this idea was born. I believe in a special report of the Working Group on Education could help to start a discussion, in this field of nuclear disarmament education. But I would love to hear from each of you what you think about that, if that's the best way to go for the group. So now I will just pass the mic to Rebecca.
Hi, everyone. Can you all hear me? I hope so. On behalf of the REPI Institute, I'm just delighted to welcome you to the working group. I'm a professor in the Science and Technology Studies Department and the director of the Judith Repi Institute for Peace and Conflict Studies. So the REPI Institute was founded in 1970. It's been engaged in education and research about the dangers of nuclear weapons for decades. Agnes has studied some of this history, as she noted in her introduction, through her archival work. And I'm really glad that she's carrying forward this work by leading this working group and deepening our engagement with current international law on nuclear weapons, as well as the anti-nuclear movement and nuclear disarmament movements more broadly. So what we'd like to do today, as Agnes mentioned, is have everyone introduce themselves. And there's two questions we want you to answer in your introduction. I'm going to paste those into the chat window right now. Those are: how does your work relate to nuclear disarmament education, and what would you like us to accomplish together as a group? We're going to ask that you keep your comment, and this is going to be a much broader conversation, and we want to make sure that everybody actually can engage and hear each other. So we're going to ask you to keep your answers to these questions ridiculously short, like 2 to 3 minutes, because then we're going to talk more. You'll have more time to talk, and we'll be able to actually build on what other people have to say. So Agnes is already introduced herself with these questions, and I'm going to go next. I'll be very brief. My first book was partly about the intellectual history of nuclear weapons, what scientists and policymakers knew about nuclear weapons, when they knew it, how that shaped their policies. And so as part of that, I studied the history of the nuclear weapons, arms control and disarmament movements, which are partly about knowledge making, but also partly about education. In terms of what I want this group to achieve, I do not have a strong agenda. I'm really letting Agnes take the lead on this group, and I'm really happy that she's doing it. I'm going to be in more of an observer status, but I am really looking forward to learning from all of you, and I am excited about what we can do together. So let's just keep going with the introductions. Again, we're going to try to keep it really brief so that everybody has time. So we actually do have time for a conversation at the end. Agnes is going to call on your name. Please do feel free to type your comments, thoughts, reactions into the chat window, because we're saving all of that so that Agnes will go back and study that and use that to help us figure out what our next steps should be. So please be actively involved, but do keep your initial comments short so that we can talk. All right, Agnes, I'm going to turn it over to you. She's going to run the show from now on.
Okay. So just to make things easy for me, since I will have to call particular participants to start, introducing themselves, I will use the list that I send you, list of participants, and I will try, call particular names and give you 2-3 minutes to introduce yourself and to say a few words, like as Rebecca asked, what this group could accomplish in your opinion. Okay, so Jonathan, I know that you joined us quite late, but would you like to start? Tell us a few words about yourself and about your work, especially with the coalition of the Physicist Coalition for Nuclear Threat Reduction. Would you like to start, Jonathan?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, this is a travel day for me, so I'm like not in my office. But yeah, my name is Jonathan Alson. I am an assistant professor. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yeah, great. I'm an assistant professor of physics at Bushnell University, which is on the west coast of the US. And so in addition to my role as a professor of physics, my background is in physics education research. And so I'm thinking about the teaching and learning of physics. And this year I'm a next generation fellow with the Physicist Coalition for Nuclear Threat Reduction. So my project with the coalition is thinking about and potentially doing research on education in nuclear disarmament within the physics context. And so that's, sorry, let me look at the question again. How does my work relate to nuclear disarmament? Yeah, I think I answered that. And then as far as the outcomes for the group, I've really been thinking about this idea of establishing a taboo around nuclear weapons. And so I'm interested in exploring in this like interdisciplinary way how to, and in a very, potentially in a very long-term way, how to best engage in efforts to establish this taboo, particularly for me, just because of education within the more formal education environment.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Sarah, would you like to go next? Sarah Al-Sayed?
Yeah, hi everyone. So I am Sarah Al-Sayed. I was a postdoc for 3 years with the program on science and global security. My contract expired in May, but I am actually still sitting as a departmental guest at SGS, and I am starting a fellowship with the Union of Concerned Scientists come September. The fellowship is 2 years long, and in the fellowship I will be engaged with questions at the intersection of artificial intelligence, remote sensing, to the extent that there is a proliferation of freely available and commercial satellite imagery, and how those impact, like the fusion of technologies, how that impacts nuclear stability. So my background is technical. My first foray into nuclear policy was through the postdoc here. I am an electrical engineer by training at the PhD level, and then I picked up a master's in philosophy of technology. So that's where I may be bringing in some STS perspective. So from my own personal experience, nuclear disarmament education was missing from my school education. I completed my high school education in Egypt, where I was born. I graduated in 2004. And that was at a private school following a public curriculum and assessment system. And I chose a mathematical sciences track that led me to study electrical engineering at the bachelor's level. And why I mentioned this personal experience rather than the work experience is merely because it is surprising that I have not experienced the disarmament discourse, and that is despite perhaps Egypt having had a leading role in promoting in diplomatic fora Middle East nuclear weapons free zone, and then moving on, it was a proposal for a Middle East weapons of mass destruction free zone, and that was since 1974. My field of studies, as I said, was electrical engineering, so I didn't engage at all with nuclear topics. But then at the postdoc level, so when I started my postdoc at SGS itself started work on the curriculum resources project, which Agnes referred to in the discussion paper, alongside other projects, and that was started at SGS in the summer of 2020. And that was in response to the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis by a police officer and the wave of protests that followed that broke out, and the troubling response by the authorities. The project aims at countering racism and other structures of exclusion and domination in teaching and research on nuclear issues. The launch was in 2021, and the project itself comprises a list of resources, of readings, proposed readings that are divided into categories: nuclear disarmament, nuclear strategy and deterrence, the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons programs, including community-centered works, and nuclear weapons and power in the global system, and then finally science and technology and security category. So I was part of the team that conceptualized the project and vetted some of the pieces for inclusion in the list of resources, and I took over the management in 2021 from Sharon Weiner. The readings themselves speak to how issues of nuclear weapons, arms control, and non-proliferation and disarmament are embedded in multiple interacting structures of racism, exclusion, domination, and exploitation at work in the world. And the readings also address the many and diverse struggles against these structures. It targets academics, professionals, or activists, and the readings encourage engagement with alternative frameworks of ideas, institutions, and policy action on those issues. The project itself is supposed to evolve continuously, but there is an ongoing discussion at SGS and also with our broader network on how to take this forward. Finally, what would I like for us to accomplish together as a group? I am honored to be part of this group, and this is my first experience being in a working group that serves potentially ongoing discussions in multilateral fora. And I'm wondering if, as part of nuclear disarmament education efforts, we should also be addressing as a group other risks that need to be taken into account in disarmament education, because I mean, siloing ourselves in just nuclear with up and coming emerging technologies, entering discussions and having their own impact on nuclear escalation, I believe that nuclear disarmament discussions education discussions should take emerging technologies into account as well. But I also wonder why the TPNW, and to the extent that nuclear disarmament education proposals and efforts are ongoing in maybe different fora. So I'm wondering what the continuities and also the distinctions of TPNW as a forum could be. Thank you, and sorry for rambling.
That's great. Thank you, Sarah. I think one question that comes to my mind when I listen to you and also hear information about the platform that you created on curriculum project, I think is in general to think about the role of this kind of digital platforms and how much more exposure they can bring to this kind of alternative discussions about nuclear weapons. So I would just throw this here into our discussions. And I would like to ask Armand Bekai now to come and speak.
Sure, thank you. Hi, hello everyone. So my name, by way of introduction, my name is Armand Bekai. I'm a researcher at the Department of Peace and Conflict Research at Uppsala University in Uppsala, Sweden. But also I'm working for this newly constituted institute called the Alva Myrdal Center for Nuclear Disarmament, which is based within the Department of Peace and Conflict Research at Uppsala University. And I've been in this position tied to the AMC, as we call it, since really its establishment in 2021. And the Alva Myrdal Center for Nuclear Disarmament itself is a research institute that aims to provide teaching, research, policy support on matters of nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. The way that the center is designed is there are researchers and professors tied with the AMC, but then the whole idea of the AMC is to be quite interdisciplinary in its approach. And having that in mind, we have created a number of working groups. We also work with working groups within this AMC, whereby we essentially invite membership from scholars, policymakers, practitioners from various fields related to peace and conflict research, political science, international law, international relations, physics, and so on, to join our respective working groups and engage in basically collaborative efforts on various issues. Those working groups work towards themes such as negotiating nuclear disarmament. There is one specifically working on the field of physics, nuclear physics, related to technical nuclear non-proliferation and safeguards. And the working group that I'm working in has to do with essentially the nexus between nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation and sanctions, essentially the utility of sanctions, coercive measures, or even inducements and so on in essentially the role that they play in the nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation field. By way of sort of concrete outputs, there is an edited volume on the same topic, which is coming out in a couple of months, published by Routledge, and that looks essentially on the topic of sanctions and nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. Literally last week, we completed our annual conference. Maybe some of you have either joined us or have heard about it. There's this annual conference on nuclear disarmament that we organize here in Uppsala. And this year, the overarching topic of the conference was verifications, essentially discussing issues to do with verifications from the standpoint of either nuclear physics or international law, international relations, and so on. In terms of the actual topic of why we have gathered to talk here today, well, education is in the essence of what the AMC does. We provide courses on nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation within the department, but also the university at large. And I think the idea is to sort of expand our sort of education portfolio. And we also see that with what is happening in the world in the last couple of years and so on, there is an increasing interest on the side of students to study more sort of hard security-related issues, international relations, and so on, NATO issues, and so on and so forth. So definitely there is an increasing interest, I think, on the field of nuclear disarmament as well. In terms of the second question, what can we do as a working group? I mean, I'm really happy to be part of this working group and also to act as that sort of building bridge between my own research institute and yourselves, both ways. And in terms of what we do, I mean, of course, I have, I think, more questions than answers, but I'm looking forward to engaging with all of you. And the first question that I have is really education geared towards whom? Are we sort of aiming to engage more actively with civil society organizations, with certain member states, engage in developing curricula for, I don't know, high school students or university students and so on and so forth. So these are more questions than sort of definitive answers I have, I think, in this regard, but very much looking forward to working with all of you. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Armand. One more question that I have to you. Is the Alva Myrdal Institute involved in the European Consortium for Non-Proliferation and Disarmament? Are you part of this consortium? because I think they have now like 112 partners all across
Mhm.
Europe. And I wonder, you know, how much impact this network have on European institutions.
Yeah.
But we can discuss that
Yeah,
later.
I think officially we're not yet, and it might simply be because I think we haven't made an active effort to be part of that consortium. I know that we hopefully in the next second part of this year, we will be publishing a policy paper with that consortium because they have this policy paper series. And I think from Sweden, there are two organizations, if I'm not mistaken, that are part of that consortium, CIPRI, one of them, and another one, I think it's tied to Stockholm University. But I think, yes, the idea would be for us to also be part of that consortium as well.
Okay, definitely we would like to establish some kind of liaison, you know, contact with them and collaborate between what is happening in Europe on this
Yes.
front of education. I know there's an annual conference happening every year, so it will be great, you know, if we could have some kind of liaison.
And if I may just add also, again, this issue of working groups and networks, actually CIPRI, who are part of this consortium, they're also members of one of the working groups of AMC. And so I think it wouldn't be so difficult for us to provide those connections and bridges between this particular working group and the EU consortium and CIPRI and so on and so forth.
Okay, thank you so much, Armand. Let's move
Thank
to
you.
Shampa Biswas, please.
Hello, everybody. I'm Shampa Biswas. I was at the AMC conference. I'm sorry I didn't meet you, Arman. So my research is primarily on the connections between race colonialism and nuclear weapons. I teach at a small college, a small private college, which is very teaching-centered, which means that I teach a lot, and I think about teaching a lot. I actually teach a lot about nuclear weapons, but I don't teach any course with nuclear in the title. And perhaps we can have a longer discussion about this at some point. I'd like to affirm what Sarah said about not siloing the teaching of nuclear and connecting it with other issues. I was recently involved in, I co-led an initiative called Decolonizing Nuclear Studies, with my colleague Anne Harrington from Cardiff University, which was a collaboration of 13 academics to create teaching resources related to the connections of nuclear weapons with race, gender, environmentalism, colonialism, etc. And these live now on an online platform called Highly Enriched, which was in the working paper, which was listed in the working paper for use for any educators. And we can talk more about these resources later as well. I'd like to forward two things that I would like us to talk more about. One is the connection of disarmament education to peace studies. I think they're sometimes used interchangeably. I'm not sure they are the same thing. And the connection of disarmament education to security studies, right, which is the much more conventional mainstream platform for teaching nuclear issues. And the second question that I would like us to talk about is the question of pedagogy. I think we talk a lot about content, what to include in a curriculum, how to build a curriculum, and less about how to teach it. I think when we're talking about disarmament education, we need to talk about both those parts, both the what and the how of teaching. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Shampa. I'm not sure if Christian Ciobanu joined us in the meantime. I didn't check. If Christian is here, I would like to call him. No, I don't think he is with us. Okay, so then let's move to Renata Delacroix, please.
Hello, good afternoon from Geneva to everyone. So thank you so much for this invitation. I'm Renata Delacroix and I work at the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research, where I lead a research program on gender and disarmament. I'm not really sure how my work relates to nuclear disarmament education. I think the products that you either do they are maybe for university or, higher education students that are already quite interested in disarmament. But when Agnes reached out, she said that among the objectives of this working group were, a work that would seek to address injustices and inequalities in the field. And that's very much, at the core of the work that we do at UNIDIR on gender and disarmament. So our program is called Gender and Disarmament. It's very much, an intersectional approach to all arms control and disarmament issues, but we also have a lot on nuclear. So I think that's what, I draw my interest in this initiative, and I'm very curious about, how this is gonna evolve. But I would just like to say that I know I'm looking forward to addressing these issues, these interconnections between, justice, equality, and disarmament. And I think that leads to the second question: what would you like us to accomplish together? It's that is the aspect that would align with my current line of work. At UNIDIR, we don't have that much on, disarmament education per se. That's more my colleague from UNODA that will be talking, that will be introducing herself today as well. So yeah, just very much looking forward to learning from all of you. And if it's of interest, I'll just put here in the chat the latest publication that UNIDIR did on intersectional gender analysis of nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament efforts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Renata. Jamie Hagan is next on my list. Jamie, are you ready to take over?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I'm ready. Hi, everyone. I am Jamie Hagan, a lecturer in international relations currently at Queen's University Belfast, but I will start at the University of Manchester in August. And here at the University or Queen's University Belfast, I've done a lot of teaching in peace and conflict studies. My main research is around queering women, peace, and security. So bringing queer perspectives to peace and security, both in practitioner work and also in academia. And then Agnes and I met when I was at Cornell presenting this emerging research project looking at lesbian leadership in peace encampments, because I'm really interested in sort of what's told and what's not, even within feminist narratives about peace and anti-nuke organizing. So I would say I'm really interested in terms of when I'm thinking about teaching, I'm thinking about addressing assumptions about what peace means and how the anti-war feminist and queer movements can really help us think differently about that education. And so in terms of what I think it'd be useful to address is I kind of want to just plus one on two of the other suggestions that were already made, that I do agree it's really important to look at security studies and sort of how disarmament is talked about, how that's really still quite separate from peace and peace studies quite often. But at the same time, acknowledging the existing feminist and queer security studies work, and think about how that, I guess my hope would be that through this work, it's more about acknowledging and understanding what's already going on and finding new ways of lifting it up within spaces like academic institutions, that I do think there's a lot of opportunity to bring in other forms of knowledge, but I think often it's about finding ways to make those connections. Like I didn't know about those resources, about the existing. Please do share all the resources in the comments, because so far everything that people have talked about I did not know about. So because I am kind of more like international relations and teaching, but I'm teaching about the UN as well. So but I also think ideally it would be really wonderful to be able to facilitate spaces that are across civil society and academia, because I think that's where the best teaching happens. So I want to think creatively about how we can help facilitate those spaces, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. Can I ask Rebecca Jovin or Jovin? Sorry, I'm not sure how you pronounce your family name.
No worries, Agnes. It's however you want it. It's a made-up name, so Joven is fine. But however, whatever works in your language. No, thanks so much for the invitations and great to meet everybody. So yeah, I'm Rebecca Joven. I'm the chief of the United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs in Vienna. So for those of you who are not so familiar with our work here in Vienna, we are a liaison office, but we are also kind of the hub for disarmament education on behalf of UNODA globally. And hence, I think this is how I ended up in this group, and very grateful for the opportunity. So we are also the custodians, I mean, first the architects and also coordinators around UNODA's disarmament education strategy, which Agnes, thank you for really elaborating on that also in your discussion paper. So I don't need to do that now because you've all read it. But we're also the custodian, so not just for kind of ODA strategy setting, but also for different tools and initiatives. One of those is our online learning platform, the UNODA Disarmament Education Dashboard, and I can put the link to that in the chat. It's also right up here next to my head. And this is basically a publicly available resource for learning for different audiences. I would say most of our content is geared towards kind of introductory audiences, but those who are already in the disarmament world, so not necessarily entirely lay people. We also have some other online resources and tools, and part of kind of the next stage of implementing the education strategy is try to consolidate that, make it more dynamic. So this is an ongoing effort that my office is also helping to coordinate and also give visibility to global resources that are out there. And this is, I think, hopefully where also this working group can come in. Just to say briefly, UNODA is also, of course, the secretariat for the TPNW process. So hence my role in this group is as an observer, since we can't really be formally associated with an input to an intergovernmental process that we are also the secretariat for, but that doesn't mean I won't be happy to participate actively in all the discussions and the brainstorming. And maybe in the discussion portion, I can also give you a bit more update on kind of what's been going on our educational work in implementing the strategy and what some of the priorities are that since it was issued, and what you picked up, Agnes, in the discussion paper. But just to kind of say for the group, I mean, a couple of things that would be super valuable from my perspective and ODA more broadly, and it's already been raised by a couple of people. I mean, first of all, if you've read our education strategy in Agnes's paper, you see partnership and also kind of networks really core to the idea of education, and of course recognizing that there's a multiplying effect in everything we all do collectively. We're all quite small individually. Our institutions don't all have global reach, so collectively, how can we really elevate and bring these issues to wider audiences? And so here I feel this group can be extremely valuable. I mean, at minimum, I'm sharing good practices and resources. I'm particularly intrigued by this idea of looking at curricula, and I like also what you said, Champa, about the pedagogy behind it. So not just the what, but also the how education on disarmament is being shared. So curricula, but also, what are tools, what are products, what are initiatives out there? How can we give them visibility? How can we amplify them and make them usable for different audiences and adaptable by different audiences? We have also different mechanisms to give visibility of ongoing work, such as through the biannual report of the Secretary General on disarmament and non-proliferation education. Several of your institutions actually did submit inputs to this year's report, but that's another means of also spreading kind of the word. But some of the other online tools I mentioned that ODA has at its disposal could also be vehicles for new educational offerings out there. So I think this group can be really helpful in that regard. For us, of course, the breadth and the focus is broadly disarmament, arms control, so not just the nuclear dimension. But perhaps this group could also be a model for other networks, similar networks, that would go beyond the nuclear, would go beyond also specifically TPNW. And one of the things that we're really hoping and is also part of our strategy, is to really also encourage regional and sub-regional networks. And so maybe this could be a catalyst for that as well, to start making some of those connections. And then, in the context of the TPNW specifically, you mentioned it, Agnes, the working group. I think some of the working groups have been more active than others. So one question would be, is, the scope for also kind of amping up and having a more specific effort and output of the working group on education. Just a question, I mean, for collective consideration for those that are also more engaged on the TPNW side. But just to say, very excited to see, what can come out of this group in terms of good practices, not just for the nuclear educational realm, but more broadly. So yeah, I'll leave it at that for now. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. A lot of ideas. Can I ask Vincent Intondi to come next?
Yes, thank you. My name is Vincent Intondi, and right now for the last year, I've been a senior lecturer at Webster University in Leiden in the Netherlands. And I'm a historian by trade. My research focuses on the intersection of race and nuclear weapons. So my first book, African Americans Against the Bomb, relates to what we're doing now, because for me, one of the reasons I wrote that was I don't know how students and others can be engaged in this issue if they don't see themselves in this history. And so when students look at history, they want to see somebody that, when they're reading history, they want to see somebody that looks like them or shares a common ancestry with them. And, before I wrote that, that wasn't happening. And so that was one of the reasons why I wrote that book, so they could feel seen in this movement. The second book came out more recently, focuses on a lot of the work that's being done at the Repi Institute on the 1980s and the 1982 rally and march at Central Park, the Freeze Initiative, and these types of things. And why I wrote that book was, again, trying to educate students and say, one, to show them that this movement in the 1980s that was so successful was actually much more diverse than previously thought. Two, that this grassroots organizing actually did move the needle and change things with the Reagan administration. And three, to show younger professionals, younger organizers today that a lot of the issues that they deal with in terms of homophobia and misogyny and racism within this movement are not new. And so to show how did the people before them deal with these issues, and then hopefully to help them progress as we move forward. I've worked a lot with the arms control community, the disarmament community, the peace community on education, and more directly on how to get more diverse voices into this movement. And as far as outcomes go, one of the big things for me that I'd like to talk about at some point is, as we saw in Agnes's report, there's a lot of organizations that are doing a lot of great work on nuclear disarmament. It's out there. The problem is, there's so many people that have no idea that it exists. So if I go into schools in Baltimore, if I go into schools in Louisiana, if I go into schools in, parts of Los Angeles even, and I ask those students in, junior high and high school, even freshmen in college, about any of this education initiatives, they have no idea what these organizations are, where they even can find this stuff. It's not reaching them. So for literally 20 years now, whether I taught as a professor in Florida, whether it was in Maryland, whether it's here in the Netherlands, I can count on my hand how many freshmen have come to my classes and have actually read a book like John Hersey's Hiroshima and know anything about the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So my hope is that we can figure out a way to get this into schools at a much, much earlier stage than having kids come at 18, 19, 20 years old and having no idea about this issue and having to kind of basically start from scratch. And I'll leave it at there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vincent. I totally agree with that. There is, so many resources that are available on different platforms, different websites, and they are fantastic, really. But visibility is the problem. So lack of this kind of platform that could bring all together and people could find it easily. That's one of the big issues. Okay, Mariko Komatsu, welcome.
Thank you. Hi, good evening from Japan. My name is Mariko Komatsu. I'm originally from Hiroshima. I'm currently based in Hiroshima as well. I just started working in this NGO, Civil Society Network, Japan Civil Society Network on SDGs. But my previous job, just immediate previous work, was in the Hiroshima Prefecture, and we have initiated a lot of nuclear disarmament education. We don't usually call that way. Originally, it wasn't being called peace education. But then I also did the research in Hiroshima University on the peace educators in Hiroshima. We have like 11 archives now on YouTube, how they have tackled with this issue of atomic bombing. Originally, it was called atomic bomb education. So I'm looking at this connection and interpretation of each educators in Hiroshima, how they interpret it and how they connect it, the issue of atomic bombing, with their expertise, with their specific interest, and how they interpret it and convey the message to students. I have received tons of peace education in my elementary school, kindergarten, elementary school days, in junior high, senior high in Hiroshima. But then now I have different perspectives on how we can cater this message of hibakusha and beyond. Now I feel like we're a gatekeeper in a way, because we do receive even now more after COVID, a lot of people come to Hiroshima to learn about it. And that leaves us with a question that why did they come? What interest? There's so many other places to go, and what motivate them to come, and what were the learnings that they have taken from Hiroshima. So by training, I'm an educator, but then I'm interested in the way that what message that has actually conveyed and stayed with the children or the people who came to Hiroshima. So what I'm interested and then expect this group to inquire is that you mentioned about the curriculum and the pedagogy, but it's also about the target as well, the target audience, that really what you aim for as a result of this nuclear disarmament education. Some of the education is about nuclear weapons, but sometimes it can be education through nuclear weapons and education for, like all these the targets and purpose as well, and then what kind of messages that transcends not only just the knowledge, but like what kind of message that we expect them to learn and what actually they receive. So those things, like I'm really interested to see with the different perspectives, different expertise, different background, and different audiences that you have. I'm very much looking forward to this working group to come with the various strategies or the resources and then ideas for next nuclear disarmament education phase. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mariko, for these comments. Benedict Madison is next on my list. Benedict, are you with us?
I'm here. Thank you, Agnes.
Hi,
Everyone. Benedict Madison, Executive Director of the Marshallese Educational Initiative. So we raise awareness about the nuclear testing legacy in the Marshall Islands. We also bring together voices of other nuclear affected communities to help facilitate their voices being heard in national as well as international settings. One example would be the Nuclear Legacy Week that we hosted earlier this year in conjunction with Nuclear Victims Remembrance Day, which is a national holiday that is commemorated in the Marshall Islands as well as in the diaspora. We also present workshops to Marshallese youth and would like to, with the help of resources, finish a textbook on the Marshall Islands and the nuclear testing legacy and its impact on the Marshallese people, including those in the diaspora. In terms of nuclear disarmament education, one thing that we've actually finished up translating the TPNW into the Marshallese language. It is still something that so many people in my community are not aware of. And so the goal moving forward is to ensure that community members are aware of what this treaty is about and how it could benefit the Marshallese people. And the question, what can we do together? I think this group, we can help amplify the voices of nuclear affected community members. Thank you.
Yeah, this is why we have you on board. You are our first link to the affected communities. But, you know, my hope is, of course, we can build a huge network when we can bring, I don't know, I think during the last meeting of the TPNW state parties, there was a statement about 100 or 150 groups affected, right, by nuclear weapons. And I hope we're going to have a lot of voices, you know, helping to produce new knowledge and helping to change education. Thank you, Benedict. Thank you so much. Mary Mitchell.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I met Agnes, I think when I was a postdoc actually at Cornell. So I'm a lawyer and I'm a historian. I'm currently an assistant professor at University of Toronto, but I'm in the middle of a move back home to the US for a position at the New Jersey Institute of Technology. And broadly speaking, my research program focuses on law and environmental social movements in the context of nuclear weapons and energy. So I focus on colonialism and especially the inequitable distribution of nuclear harms. I'm excited to follow up Benedict. My first project actually uses the transnational legal history or traces it of US nuclear blasting in Island Kind Ad, the Marshall Islands, to explore how sovereignty itself changed after World War II and the role that islanders played in that. So I'm particularly interested in how Marshall Islanders' mobilizations and activism has shaped international movements for decolonization, for disarmament, and in the arena of climate change as well. And I think one of the most important lessons that I've learned from doing that work is the significance of face-to-face human connections in kind of fostering change and fostering policymakers' understanding and action on the harms of nuclear weapons. Since the beginning of US colonial rule in the 40s and all the way to the present day, Marshallese leaders and activists' international work has been really, really important in this regard in changing minds. And this remains true today, like Marshallese leaders like Benedict continue to engage in this international policymaking and lawmaking work. And so as an academic participant in this initiative, I'm interested in listening to leaders from nuclear affected communities. I'm interested in learning more about how they think, or you all think, that university educators can best contribute to ongoing initiatives that are coming up from the grassroots from those communities. So how can we be better contributors? How can we who are in the universities kind of marshal our resources to amplify and support those kinds of initiatives? One issue that I hope this group might explore actually relates to political polarization surrounding nuclear technologies, especially in the United States. I'm interested in thinking together about what it takes for educational initiatives to be impactful. What does it take for educators to really be heard and their lessons onboarded? This comes from experience that I have had working in educational initiatives that really aimed to bring scientists and engineers together with humanists and social sciences in order to promote dialogue and improve undergraduate education on nuclear affairs. And teaching in that capacity, I've taught nuclear history and nuclear affairs to many STEM students, many of whom plan to or will work in defense or will work in, for instance, the US military. And it strikes me that that is a really important constituency to reach. But it's also my experience that a number of these students seem to assume from the outset that I'm most interested in persuading them to embrace a strict anti-nuclear position, or that I'm acting as an advocate rather than an educator. And well, obviously, you know, I do have a standpoint informed by my research. That's not my aim when I get in the classroom. My hope when I get in the classroom is to help all of my students develop their knowledges and develop the tools that are needed for them to think critically and in a deeply informed way about nuclear issues so that they can develop their own positions. But to get to that point, I've found that it often takes this additional legwork to establish credibility as someone coming from the social sciences and the humanities, to kind of create trust necessary to open a broader dialogue. And so when I read the circulated paper, I just thought perhaps we might consider not only how to expand educational efforts, but you know, and in line with some of the other comments today, how to create learning environments where educators, whether they're coming from civil society or they're coming from within universities, can be fully heard and trusted by a wide range of audiences. And then once we reach students, and that does happen, and that's kind of one of the most exciting parts about doing this work, is when you see people's mindset change, when you see them start thinking differently. But then they ask me, like, well, so how can I get involved? And I'm often asked this by like nuclear engineering students, by STEM students at the end of a term who become interested in these issues, and they say, you know, can you help me find an internship? Can you, like, how can I get involved? So I also, and I'm just one person and I can't get everyone these opportunities. So I'm also interested in whether the group could consider or think about what's the next step after education. Like, how do, once people have been reached or they're interested and they're engaged, especially, you know, students, maybe what do we do after that? How can we turn that into action? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Mara. This is a great point. I just want to mention here one thing because I might forget later. So for instance, the European Consortium on Non-Proliferation and Disarmament, which I told you has about 112 or 20 partners, they actually provide opportunities for internships in all of these partner organizations. And the partnerships are paid by the European Union, which is like the main, you know, funding institution for the consortium. So definitely there could be some next steps created for people who are willing, you know, to continue to work in this field. And what you mentioned about teaching students not what to think, but how to think, right? So that's the bigger issue that definitely should be considered on the pedagogy side. Thank you so much. Benoit Pelopidas, would you like to come next?
Absolutely. Thanks, Agnes. And also, I want to congratulate you for like the masterful management of the lineup, because literally what I'm going to say aligns perfectly with what some of what Mary just said. So, you know, nice to meet you all. I've actually read a lot of your work, but it's also an opportunity for me to meet you know, new colleagues. I'm Benoit. And the reason I connect with this group is because in 2017, I've created a research and teaching program called Nuclear Knowledges, based at Sciences Po in Paris. And this program, essentially, if the field was as I think it should be, would be totally trivial. But it turns out that it's not trivial at all. So it's distinct by the fact that it refuses funding that carries any conflict of interest. So we've refused funding from ministries of defense, manufacturers of, you know, industries, of the weapons, or even disarmament activists, so that in the context of a nuclear weapon state, we can actually create and objectify the distinction between activism and scholarship, and then turn it into an educational practice. And so that's where I'm going to be a good kid, and I'm going to actually answer my two questions. So the way what I'm doing relates to education is, I think it does in three forms. The first one is I really, and that's how that connects to what Mary was saying. What I'm doing is not disarmament education, because I think in a nuclear weapon state, if you say you do disarmament education, you're received as, okay, so you're doing propaganda. So the way I do education, and that's what I heard in what Mary said, is I'm showing students that they have a choice, that they don't have to simply accept what is as the only or the best policy possible. and I'm giving them tools to be critical of it. And here I want to thank Alicia, who's participated many times in many sessions to precisely show or to help show how particular funding streams produce particular types of analysis. So I think the education for me is really showing students that, one, they cannot choose not to be affected by nuclear weapons policies, because I mean, I'm throwing it out there because I think a lot of us educators see the same thing, which is when we tell them about kind of hard facts of nuclear realities, you can see that our students think, okay, either disaster happens during my lifetime and then I'm kind of dead, or it doesn't, and then I'm massively better off if I immediately forget about it. So my starting point as an educator is to crack that and to say, look, even if disaster doesn't happen in your future, it has already happened to affected communities and you're impacted by it anyway already. So that's step one. Then shows them that the choice that they have is not to choose to be affected or not, but to be active or passive, and then gives them critical resources to do that, and also do chronological surveys about the evolution of attitudes vis-a-vis nuclear weapons and how they relate to particular knowledge levels. And so here in the chat, I will paste the Google Scholar profile of the program so that you get all our publications, in particular two that relate to what we're doing, where we've talked about in particular. In terms of what I want us to do, or what I hope we would do as a group, I mean, essentially what I just hope is that you tell me how I can be supportive. The thing that I thought was a little unusual and a little even counterintuitive was that you're thinking about doing disarmament education for countries that have already signed the disarmament treaty. So it seems to me that if you want to do disarmament education, you should do it primarily to educate those who have not done that. So I was a little curious about how you would relate disarmament education in TPNW states and disarmament education in the states where the weapons are. Thank you.
Mhm. Thank you, Benoit. Just on the last point, definitely you are right. We don't want to educate people only in the states that are already part of the TPNW, because that wouldn't, advance things much. But as you know, part of the TPNW is to implement, universalize the treaty. And I think here, even the states who are already member of the TPNW can play the role. But our group definitely can produce recommendations which will be used in the states who are observers or not observers yet, or countries that, nuclear arms countries. So that's the goal, definitely, to improve education in the countries that we want to bring on board. But I would like to, later discuss this kind of final product of our group that we might be thinking about. But definitely what a group like that can do, I think, is to produce a set of recommendations that could be debated in the broader forum, and potentially build some kind of network, which will bring a lot of different actors on board and make these various resources and platforms also more visible, like what we mentioned earlier in the discussion. So I think, later we can divide, of course, the work of the group even into some different subgroups, I think. And the different subgroups could, discuss pedagogy side, maybe institutional side, what could be the outcome of our work, and then also content, of course, of education, like what would we like to emphasize, what kind of actors we would like to bring into the network, into teaching. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that we should be brainstorming on. Okay, so let's pass to our last, I think, two participants today. I have still Kathleen Sullivan on the list and Alicia Zachary-Sanders. So Kathleen, would you like to take mic next?
Sure, thank you so much. It's lovely to be here with you all. I would have been an academic, but Tony Blair changed the immigration policy in the UK. So I was forced to move home to New York City in 1999. And that's when I met Felicity Ruby, who was then founding Reaching Critical Will, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, and the extraordinary Ray Atchison, who now leads that project. In 2000, we started Reaching Critical Will, and through that, I was introduced to the UN study on disarmament and nonproliferation education when it started in 2000. Michael Cassandra was there at the helm at what was the Department for Disarmament Affairs. It's crazy to think that we're now just an office. And Rebecca, lovely to meet you here online. I was the NGO consultant with Natalie Goldring to the UN study. And what excites me about the UN study, which I think is still relevant today, and following up on those most recent comments, is that the study and its recommendations, which were unanimously adopted, including nuclear armed states back in 2002, the emphasis was on education for disarmament and not education about disarmament. And I think that we really need to lean into that as we look at how this committee can be very useful. When I think I'm the only high school teacher on this august panel, so I'll say that in my early days in New York, I headed up a project for Educators for Social Responsibility called the Nuclear Weapons Education and Outreach Project. I worked throughout the 5 boroughs of New York in public schools primarily, where I was lovingly referred to as the nuclear bomb lady. I did interactive education with the young people because working at that level to engage young people with their own opinions and their own research projects were very effective. And I also really leaned in on the interactive pedagogy of my mentor, Joanna Macy, who I would love to introduce you all to if you're not familiar with her work. Also, at that time, when the recommendations came out in 2002, I was invited by the Japanese government to bring these interactive education workshops to high school students in Tokyo, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki. And I can say that that trip positively changed my life. I had first worked with Hibakusha in 2000, again through Reaching Critical Will, where we organized a truth commission during the May 2000 NPT review conference, which is when I first met Setsuko Thurlow, another great mentor of mine. And the UN Cyber School Bus later became a project out of UN ODA, where we wrote curriculum on disarmament education. And together with Peter Lucas in 2006, or 2007, I can't remember, we published the work, Action for Disarmament, 10 Things You Can Do. That is still a relevant resource, but it needs updating in terms of the treaties that have since been acted, not least the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. In 2007, I was invited to Australia for the inauguration of the ICANN campaign and wrote the first materials for high school students on nuclear issues. But the big move for me was bringing Hibakusha to New York City schools. In 2008, through a collaboration with Peace Boat, and my friend Akira Kawasaki, Mariko and I worked on this project together as well. There was a global voyage of 100 Hibakusha traveling around the world. Setsuko was also on this journey, and that inaugurated for us in New York the Hibakusha Stories Project. Over 10 years, we brought firsthand witnesses from Hiroshima and Nagasaki to around 50,000 New York City public school students. And so I can say, at least for that cohort, they were definitely educated on what nuclear weapons do and their current reality, and debunking the American myth that nuclear weapons ended the war. So that has been an ongoing project. And in 2017, we sort of stopped bringing the Hibakusha to New York because they would still say yes, but because of their advancing age and our budget was not one that we could afford a business class airfare, we decided that we would no longer invite them to save them from having to turn us down, which they probably wouldn't have done. But during that time, we lived with each other, we ate with each other, we had a wonderful chef that came in and cooked for us in the various homes where the Hibakusha were staying. So we really created a family and a community, which I think is very important in terms of interactive education and that trust building that we were talking about earlier. I'd also just like to mention that the other focus, besides interactive education, which was also noted in that first study back in 2000, but using the arts to educate the public about nuclear issues and nuclear realities has been very important to the Hibakusha Stories Project. We've worked with theater artists, we've worked with musicians, and the other plethora of professional artists that live in New York City that donated their time to our project. Through that also came NICAN, the New York campaign to abolish nuclear weapons. We again continue to lean into the visual arts and music. We also created a map of New York City to educate the public on the importance of the role of New York in the Manhattan Project. People will think of Columbia University, where the first successful fission experiments happened in the US, but few people will realize that 3/4 of the uranium used in the Manhattan Project was stored in New York City, and that created affected community members right there in the 5 boroughs. The final thing that I'd like to bring our attention to is a latest project called the Nuclear Truth Project, where we are centering the voices of Indigenous and affected community members as experts, and also advancing protocols for engagement, because academics, researchers, journalists can helicopter into the communities of affected peoples, take their stories and run with them for the betterment of our movement. But oftentimes people are left feeling abused, disregarded, and not compensated for their time. So our work on protocols for engagement in collaboration with affected community members and Indigenous peoples around the world, we hope to rectify that. And also there is a report on our website, which I'll put in the chat, which is about archival justice and how we can forward the truth and reality about the current nuclear harms that continue to harm people and the planet to this day. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Kathleen. Alicia Zachary-Sanders.
Thanks so much. I'm Alicia Sanders-Zachary. I'm the Policy and Research Coordinator of ICANN. In terms of how our work relates to nuclear disarmament education, I think there's, of course, our work in general to educate the general public about the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons, highlighting, of course, the perspective and advocacy of nuclear survivors as the real experts on nuclear weapons, working with Kathleen and others on that work. We also put out a report in 2019 about US university links to nuclear weapons production. And from that, there's been a network created called the Schools of Mass Destruction Working Group, bringing together students and other university members on the US that are working to challenge their university's involvement in nuclear weapons production. And I also work on, as Benoit mentioned, the financial ties to the nuclear weapons industry, looking specifically at think tanks, but very interested in expanding that to universities. And in that vein, last week, I launched a report with my colleague Susie Snyder on global nuclear weapons spending, where we do a bit more of that deep dive into the industry behind nuclear weapons. So it should come to no surprise as an activist that I'm very interested in terms of what we produce, a very active take on nuclear disarmament education. And I think it would be really great if, as a group, we can find a way to support campus activism. And I think in that sense, there's kind of two aspects. One is creating whatever resources we need to create. Maybe it's a handbook or a toolkit on kind of how students or professors can get involved in activism against nuclear weapons and for nuclear disarmament. And there's a lot of different veins that I think cover different areas of work that people in this group are involved in. And then the more difficult part that I think a few people have brought up on how do we actually reach students? How do we get any resources that we create into campuses and into students? And I think that's why it's great. We've got such a range of educators on this call who have those networks. But I think another way, and for me, this is maybe the best connection to the TPNW, is engaging with youth networks like Youth for TPNW that meet around kind of TPNW meetings and trying to engage at an early stage with students and with youth groups and trying to understand how our resources could be most helpful for them and could be most easily dispersed. So I tend to agree with some of the points that Benoit made about kind of our focus. Maybe it's less on TPNW states parties and diplomats themselves, but can still be linked to the TPNW in terms of the networks that are meeting around TPNW meetings and that are engaged in nuclear disarmament through kind of the forum that the TPNW creates. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Alicia. I hope I didn't miss anyone. I think two more people who told me will join the session didn't join the session. So I think we all had a chance to give this introductory remarks and share our first thoughts. So I think I will change our view now to gallery, and we could have probably about half an hour of a more open discussion. So let me propose one thing. So you know, our next steps were to share the recordings from 2 sessions. You know, I will also meet people tomorrow and have a similar discussion as today. In a couple of days, we will send the recordings to all of you if you would like to have a look at the second session and the ideas brought by other participants. And then probably over summer, I will try to summarize our discussions and, you know, try to link the arguments that people are making during these meetings and think about the next steps for the group. And what will be very helpful, I think, today to discuss is maybe at least think about the major streams of discussions that we should have. So for me, for instance, after hearing all of you, I think one part of the discussion could be about what the group could achieve in the sense of a final product. If it should be really a special report with some kind of recommendations, and we have to think what will be the major audience for these recommendations, and you know, in what kind of forum we would like to present that and discuss the report to make things, you know, move forward. Second, our long-term plan with Rebecca was to work towards some kind of network that will bring people from the academia, civil society, United Nations agencies, and all people involved also, you know, from all the groups formed with the communities affected by nuclear weapons, to have some kind of platform for exchanges this idea further, and also to present them to, you know, to new actors, to get new actors involved. So that was our initial idea, and I would like to, you know, hear, for instance, you and ODA, I think in the strategy, nuclear disarmament strategy, discussed this, that these partnerships has to be extended somehow. And as Rebecca mentioned at some point, we could also think about regional or sub-regional collaborations. But I think it would be actually wonderful to have some kind of global network when we can bring voices from people, not only, you know, from the US and Europe, but really involve actors from African countries and South America and actors from Asia. So this is the next also idea that I would like us to discuss and think about if a network is a good way to go and you know, also consider in the recommendations. And then of course all the ideas that you brought today about conceptualizing teaching itself, how it should be done on the side of pedagogy, and what kind of issues should be included in our discussions. Definitely the injustices related to nuclear weapons, I think, is one of the issues that should be somehow considered, but one subgroup of our working group. Gender issues, as Renata brought them into our thinking, and also intersectional issues, how to link teaching about, you know, nuclear weapons or nuclear disarmament to other issues that might be of concern to younger generation, and how they relate through, you know, funds spent on nuclear weapons and not other human needs. So I will open now our session to some kind of more free comments and open discussion. Please just, the easiest thing will be just to press raise hand button, so I see who would like to speak. Thank you so much. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I see Alicia. Could you start? Yeah.
Yeah, it's not so much a question. It's not so much a comment, more a question, just kind of about, yeah, how you see kind of the working methods of this group, and I don't know, kind of deciding on the final products, how we get there, kind of the involvement of each of the members. Is that something? I mean, do you plan to write something down and have us review it, or just from a kind of boring procedural perspective, how do we move forward?
So you know, the plan for the fall was to bring the group together. The ideal format would be to have a two days workshop, but we didn't secure funding yet, since the group is quite large. It's about 30 people. I'm not sure if we can manage to secure enough funds to organize a 2-day workshop at Cornell. I will be working on it. But if this doesn't work, I was thinking that maybe we divide the group into some subgroups. I was thinking to 4 or even to 6 groups, since we are quite many, to work on these particular issues that I just mentioned. So idea will be to get a little bit more into the issues that we have discussed. And maybe if we have subgroups, I was thinking about having one leading person that could be, you know, maybe presenting some kind of conceptual paper coming from these discussions in the fall. And definitely, I think we would take charge of kind of drafting some initial report and maybe then sending to everyone for review. Potentially, if the report is ready by March 2025, then maybe we could have or a side event at the 3rd meeting of the state parties of the TPNW, you know, when the report could be presented and discussed, or even submitted for the main, you know, debate during the meeting. So that was my initial thinking, and I'm also, of course, open to any other ideas or a different format even of our final product, because it doesn't have to be a special report for the TPNW meeting. It could be just a report of our working group that could be used as one of the, you know, reports that advance the thinking on education, but maybe link somehow to work that the UN ODA is doing, or maybe other working groups are trying to achieve. Yeah, I see Benoit and also Shampa. So let's start with Benoit.
Yeah, so I'll follow Alicia's trend in asking a question, which is really, I see myself in a supporting role here. And it's really about what the practical aim of the group is, because building on what you told me briefly before, if practically the point is to convince or to help educators in also in nuclear weapon states to get people to think about disarmament, I think having a disarmament report with a TPNW stamp on it makes it more difficult rather than easier. So it really is about what exactly is it that this group wants to achieve practically? And if you tell me that, then I'm gonna try to come up with something not too stupid about how I can help with that.
Let's continue with Shampa before I respond. Yeah, and Rebecca.
So I heard a couple of threads that I want to pull together here. And I think mostly from the thread that Mary initiated about differentiating between education and advocacy / activism, right? And I'm thinking if we should think about two different projects here. Because I'm with Benoit in that I don't teach disarmament studies. I'm teaching students to be critical thinkers. And I'm wondering if we call the educational portion of this disarmament studies as separate from this other thing called security studies. We have already ceded the serious ground to the security studies people and marginalized ourselves. It's a process of self-marginalization, right? Because it's easily marked as an ideological project because it's so goal focused, right? It's moving towards something already.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if the education process is actually a security studies project. Why not? Why are we not teaching security studies with all the critical tools that we have already? And then the other project, which I think Alicia mentioned, is creating an actual toolbox for activists and advocates, right? Which is also a teaching document or a teaching repository, but of a different kind, which is really focused on a specific goal. So those are like, to me, two different projects, and maybe we want to do both of those, but they bring up different kinds of orientations.
Yes, so just before I pass to Rebecca, so I agree, even in my discussion paper, I mentioned these two different understandings of education as, education for disarmament, basically advocacy work, and education in the explanatory sense and critical thinking sense, or as you link that to security studies. The only worry, Shampa and Benoit, I have is that, the systemic change is really difficult to achieve, especially in the United States. And what I have learned from my archival work about the 1980s, there were some attempts to introduce more teaching on disarmament coming from various groups that created even teaching programs. But there was a huge opposition, of course, coming from the think tank and academic work on the other side. So it was a very sensitive and political issue. So, but I think an amazing work in the 1980s was done through this extracurricular education when students started, to organize debates on the campuses, inviting academics, scientists, and people from the policy world. And it was actually a very detailed and interesting discussion about everything that was happening with the nuclear weapons and nuclear arms race. So, so as you said, definitely we will have to distinguish if this group will be working on advocacy or advancing education at the university level or high school level. Maybe we can do both, addressing different audiences. That's one possibility. So we should definitely discuss that further, advocacy versus teaching. I will pass it to Rebecca now to see what she wants to say.
Thanks so much, Agnes. Listen, I mean, very much to echo a lot what's already been said. I mean, for us, and I think this is also a point we made in our strategy, access to the formal educational system is difficult, if not impossible. And I think for most of you on this call, it's a similar situation, right? And whether that's the university level, even for public universities, and let alone, high school or younger levels. So this is a real obstacle for us. And for us, our natural counterpart are also not the ministries of education, they're the ministries of foreign affairs. So, there's real limitations in terms of the reach, right? So I think also this was also the idea behind network generation around educators, to find those educators like many of you on these calls who are engaged, passionate, and ready to work in this area, and then see how those connections can be grown and the toolbox expanded so that, more, so that we can collectively reach more audiences, right? So I think the network dimension of this group is music, certainly to you and ODA's ears and my ears. what you said, Agnes, I think is important and is important for us as well, is to say, okay, so how do we expand that beyond those institutions that are already very much involved in this world of disarmament, non-proliferation, arms control, which is where many of you also are currently working. How do we reach those that are not so much within that already existing network, especially in the global South, outside of North America and Europe, I would say. And so how, is that something that this group could also facilitate in some way? I mean, I think that would be extremely valuable from our perspective. And then, on this idea about education on versus for, I mean, for us, and as Kathleen kind of laid it out too, the 2002 study was very clear. It's, should be both, but ultimately it's about disarmament, education for disarmament, but really it's about giving people, different audiences, the tools to engage critically and to forge, their own path and their own conclusions, but to basically connect education with empowerment. And that's really also the philosophy and where our educational works intersect a lot with our youth empowerment work, because we see that as an important constituency, and to say, how do we not only give the tools, but then nurture these communities and help these individuals build towards further engagement. And so maybe that links a little bit to what some of you have described as the advocacy part, but for me it's also a little bit like, how does somebody do forge a career in the world of disarmament or non-proliferation, arms control, and trying to really instill this as something that is desirable and important, which I think is a problem, given that for about a generation or so, these issues were not really even on the table of, general public debate or part of, as you all have pointed out, basic learning curricula. So there's a whole generation of people, maybe outside of, with a few exceptions in Japan and elsewhere, that have grown up with absolutely no, access or link to this as a contemporary issue that they should even care about, right? So, but again, I think we also said in our strategy, and this is a dilemma that we face for sure, and I think this group will face too, is what is the primary audience? Because there are a lot of audiences. And there have to be a lot of audiences, but where can this kind of group have the most value add? I would argue it's probably, again, at that kind of university level students, but from wider communities, not that just those IR type of students that are already kind of engaged, but the STEM community and other communities, and working in a multidisciplinary way. That I think really, really key in this environment. But I think that is a question for this group, where does the group want to put its emphasis and its collective power, because it won't be able to reach all those nodes or do all those tracks in parallel, given the volume of the work to be done. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Vincent, would you like to say something? We can't hear you. I think you might be muted.
Sorry. Yep. So I know we're talking a lot here about, teaching in the classroom versus the advocacy part, and activism versus education. While I understand that, obviously, as being a professor this long, I'm also I feel that we're running out of time to keep having debates when it comes to nuclear weapons and nuclear war. We need to do something, and it needs to be done yesterday. So what I don't want to do is do something that's either redundant and is already being done by groups of people that are doing it well, or spend a lot of time with all of you, these amazing thinkers and scholars and organizers, to come up with a report that's going to be presented, but then nothing's going to come of it. And we're going to go, what happened to that 5 years later? Like, we just don't have that luxury anymore. We're this close. Like, we just can't do that. And so I think what everybody's kind of said is the who we're trying to educate and the how are obviously the big important pieces, but certain things, I think we need to think long-term. I think we need to think short-term into projects as well. So, for example, again, I'm thinking of yes, we're looking at the university level, but again, I know that if I went into certain communities, marginalized communities, and I said, hey, are you thinking about, a high school junior? Are you thinking about going to Middlebury for graduate studies or for your undergrad? They're going to go, I don't know where Monterey is on a map. I can't afford, I don't know. So how can we then expect them to get internships and be interested in this and all of this if they don't even, this is a completely different world to them. They don't know that it exists. So whether that is through maybe a summer institute for high school teachers in marginalized communities, so we can teach them how to incorporate this into their classrooms, whether it's giving them tools so that an art teacher, a music teacher, a creative writing teacher knows how to incorporate this into their lessons. These are the things that I'm thinking about that we need to, really sit down and say, how do we do this? So it doesn't need to be, so if there is a music teacher that, doesn't have this, it's not this, really set in stone thing, but they're saying, I want to incorporate nuclear disarmament some way into my classroom, and I'm a music teacher. Oh, I can do a module on how many songs are about this and have been created and lyrics about this, or what singers, have put this in their music and have been inspired by this. And again, it's not to me about creating the next generation of IR professors. Like for us, kids that then go on into college, maybe they're going to major in nursing and in architecture and business and all these things. Cool, okay. But what we teach them on this issue, well, hopefully that compassion, that empathy, those things will carry on, which is in the 80s why we had nurses for nuclear disarmament, architects for nuclear disarmament, athletes for United for Peace, right? They took that stuff with them into their industries, and that's how we can change things as well. And then the last thing I'll say is, I think if we are going to kind of put a long-term thing on this, hopefully we're all alive for it, there is not just thinking in the US, but even worldwide, how many of us can count or know how many museums exist in the world on peace and specifically nuclear disarmament? I've been to Hiroshima and Nagasaki a bunch of times, and I know those museums, how powerful they are, but we don't have that. And again, I know we don't have the funding, but if you think about it, the Vietnam Wall in the US has the names of 58,000 men on it, but nowhere in the entire United States, not nowhere, is there the names of the 3.8 million Vietnamese that were killed. That wall would be 10 miles long. And then how would we think about it? So imagine if we did have that funding, or we did just start the process of saying, we want to create a major museum, whether it's in DC, New York, wherever we decide, or if it's in another country, it doesn't matter, on specifically the history of nuclear disarmament, nuclear weapons, and what that could do. Because as Kathleen pointed out, people learn differently. Some people are visual learners, some people learn through art, some more on the academic side or with reading. And we have to think about all these different ways in which we can read, because it's not going to be monolithic. There's not going to be one way. I just think these are some of the questions and things we need to tease out and kind of think about as we're going forward as a group on how, what the end product looks like.
Yeah, I like very much what Vincent just said, and I think it doesn't go against this kind of previous idea that maybe we can work on different type of issues and different type of teaching. So what you are saying, Vincent, that maybe if we want to make a meaningful report with some kind of recommendations for near future, not necessarily far away future, we could have a part of a report that would advance advocacy on the nuclear disarmament, and we can involve people from civil society and also affected communities into this kind of thinking. Today, I invited also just to link to what you said about a museum, about, nuclear history or nuclear disarmament. It doesn't have to be a really even physical museum. I invited Alice Ferrario from Senza Atomica organization in Italy. And Senza Atomica organized over the last couple of years exhibitions that move all across Italy, and thanks to these exhibitions explaining issues related to nuclear weapons and TPNW, they managed to educate 80,000, students and young kids about nuclear issues, which is like a fantastic art initiative that is also educational. So definitely there is some kind of field for this kind of work that could educate people quickly. Or if we could mention from the 1980s survival summer organized in Boston and San Francisco that had simply teachings on the campuses and different parts of the city that was a great education initiative for people who were probably sometimes just coming to listen to these talks by chance or because they heard about this from their friends. So that would be wonderful to have recommendations on this kind of advocacy initiatives. That's one side. But we could also think about teaching or, how to link people who would like to improve teaching at the university level. And I'm not sure if we should talk only about advanced studies or expanding actually education, through STEMs and linking them to social studies about nuclear disarmament to teach a larger group of students, or maybe extracurricular initiatives. But I think this kind of report, also our group could be divided into subgroups that works on the one side of advocacy, on the other side on conceptually improving teaching, the pedagogical side that was mentioned earlier. That could bring the recommendation in general for, I guess, how to improve the role of educators in all this field, who could become educator or how we can increase the number of educators in nuclear disarmament. So I would love to hear your reactions also to this kind of possibility.
Kathleen,
yes.
I see your hand is up, so I just wanted to defer to you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Finn, for what you said. I 100% agree. And I wonder how we can use the tools that we've already identified to cross-reference for that early list of activism. And Alicia's excellent report on universities of mass destruction, a toolkit for how to, getting to those students at those universities with a very simple how to do your own activism kind of thing. I'm sure that a lot of us have ideas about that or know students that are doing that. To do peer-to-peer education, I think is also really, really important. I've been out of academia for 20 years, but when I was in, a feminist critique of security studies was like, IPRA, Elise Boulding, all the people that were doing international peace research and, making some really good ground. But then peace research always being associated with, the sort of namby-pamby left and the feminine, whereas security studies was the sort of robust, masculine, how do we push against that? I'd love to hear Jamie's response to that. If we're thinking about queering security studies, are we even calling it security studies? Or are we understanding that by that, this cohort means human security? Because there's a lot of different kinds of security studies, as you all are aware of. And I also wanted to just put forward the name of Kazuyo Yamane. She's a Japanese scholar of peace museums. And I think that she would be an excellent addition to this group if we're still taking members. And also, Jamie, if you could, maybe not at this meeting, but sometime in the future, talk about Coromila as a place where reconciliation has happened amongst groups that are not likely to come together through young people in the troubles in Northern Ireland. That's a lot of different ideas, but thank you for listening.
Thank you, Kathleen. And Alicia is also raising her hand.
Yeah, thanks so much. Really interesting ideas put forward. And I'm not reacting to kind of the proposal of having a working group more focusing on education and pedagogy and one on activism and advocacy. And I think, I can see the rationale for that, but I also think it's important that when we think of kind of what we're proposing in terms of campus activism and advocacy, that yes, it does have the purpose of advancing disarmament, but also very much of education in that, using the Schools of Mass Destruction report, for example, is a way to show students that nuclear weapons are actually connected to them, to their university. And so it's a way to engage students and make them more interested in learning more because they can see how their university is connected. So I think that, kind of finding that there can be a difference in, having a specific purpose of supporting activism, but also keeping in mind that that is very much linked to the kind of educational purpose of the group too.
And also, Benoit, there was this interesting discussion organized by the Managing the Atom, and I think nuclear knowledge is on the knowledge production itself when it comes to nuclear weapons. So I think that should be also part of our discussion because, you know, thanks to these different platforms and initiatives that were mentioned in my discussion paper, I think we could create some kind of alternative knowledge, or at least distribute this alternative knowledge and affect, you know, research and teaching. So if you would like to take, say a few words about this discussion, you know, that took place some time ago within Managing the Atom, and what we could learn from that, like what could help us.
I shall comply immediately. So very, very briefly, what this discussion was, it was essentially kind of a dream for me because it was an opportunity to speak to Carol Cohn about how, as educators, we face the challenge she literally posed for herself and for us all as essentially followers, you know, at the end of the classic paper where she says, either you teach techno-strategic language and then you literally enable the seduction of the language because as she demonstrates convincingly, you get seduced not just by teaching it, but also by learning it. So then we become accomplices, or we do not. And then we force our students to be irrelevant or to be out of the policy rooms. And so what I've developed in the last 15 years of teaching was simply a way of overcoming, or what I thought could be a way of overcoming that. And so I'm not going to tell you what it is, but the bottom line was I wanted to bring it to her to see whether she would agree that this is a valid way of going forward, or whether she would say, just Benoit, just stop talking nonsense, you're still stuck and you don't even know it. So that's what the discussion was, how to overcome this dilemma between, and how to essentially become able to teach the techno-strategic language without enabling the seduction that comes with it. Briefly, that's I'm gonna look for a link to the discussion.
Actually. Yeah, because I think this is a part of the dilemma when it comes to education, also linked to nuclear disarmament. Yes. Any other comments? Yeah. Oh, Mary is here. Yes. Please go ahead.
Sorry, my hand was washed out in the background.
Sorry.
So just two things that come to mind. So one is just about meeting students where they are. And I mean, obviously, I do understand that things like teach-ins, for instance, are really important, or they can be important. But also, when we think about moving public opinion writ large and moving a wide range of voters in a way that can change something like the United States' foreign policy, I think it's also important to acknowledge that there's a large proportion of students who, the moment it's a teach-in or the moment it's a protest, are going to immediately shut their brains off. Like, I've taught people who will become Air Force missileers, right? And they, more than perhaps anyone, needs to understand the real impacts of their work. And these folks are not unreasoned or unreasonable, but perhaps have just not been exposed to, to think about all of the dimensions of a problem. And so I do, think that audience is an important question, and thinking about the relationship between, and obviously there are forms of research that are advocacy or that entangle with advocacy, but just really thinking about these questions of audience and how different audiences may be reached, I think is going to remain really important. And then in relation to this, the second issue that I have encountered is, so we're talking today about disarmament or non-proliferation. I think in many students' minds and in general, they think of nuclear stuff, they think of the energy question as well. And what I have seen happening lately is industry is really pushing an environmental angle on nuclear energy aspects and pushing particular sort of ideological agendas on nuclear energy. Of course, as scholars, we all know that energy and weapons are intrinsically related. Like, how do you breed nuclear fuel? You know, what are the historic linkages? But the moment that there's this question or this issue of how do we address relationships between weapons and energy, and if you have people who are coming into it with particular preconceptions about the environmental desirability of energy, how do you kind of persuade them on weapons? Like, I just think it's that these issues are increasingly entangled, and the kind of grid is shifting in terms of what people's attitudes might be towards nuclear technologies writ large, at the connection between weapons and energy as well.
Yes. Yes. Go, Vincent, if you would like to add something.
Yeah, I just, one thing that kind of reminds me of a microcosm of what we're kind of talking about too is that, so Alana Day Samuel and myself have a podcast. And the whole point of our podcast, we decided early on, was to make it for people that this issue is not in their wheelhouse. They don't know anything about it. They don't live and breathe it every day like us. So how can we talk to them? How can we educate them? And that's kind of what the driving force that we kind of do with it. And the reason we did that is because there's all these podcasts already on nuclear disarmament and arms control, right? We've all been on them. So what happens is we all go on them and we talk to each other and we're guests, but we're not reaching anybody else. We're just talking to each other. And our whole thing was, how do we have this funding for this podcast, how do we get out of that? And that's kind of what I see here. Like, we want to make sure that whatever we do is getting outside our bubble, right? To people that don't live and breathe this every day. And so I think that kind of just sticks in my, like, okay, how do we get to them? How do we get to them is something that we just kind of keep in our head as we're going through this whole process, so we don't kind of slide back into some of the same things that we do. Like, oh, I'll write this academic paper that, only you guys will read. Like, how do we make sure that we don't, fall into those patterns?
Yeah, this is definitely an important point, that we produce something, again, meaningful for people outside our group, not just for ourselves. But I think we will definitely have to limit somehow the goal of this group and think what is feasible, to produce within just a meeting or two of people coming from different backgrounds, and how this can advance the issues in education. So definitely one idea is to learn something from the initiatives that exist already, both at the United Nations level and all these independent initiatives that are not really connected or visible. That's my problem with all of that. There are some wonderful resources for teaching at different levels, but we have to make them more visible. So also just the simplest goal and starting point could be to analyze the things that have been tried and have been done, and how we can add to these ideas, or how we connect these ideas to make them more visible. So this is what I would propose, that as a starting point, what we have learned from the initiatives that we have been all involved in, and how can they help to improve education. Yeah. Also, the person who was missing today, who will be joining the session tomorrow, is Matthew Bolton, who works a lot on the issue of youth education. I would love to hear from him, and he runs the Institute for Disarmament in New York at Pace University. So I'm also looking forward to hear what Matthew will say tomorrow. And Hiro Miyazaki works on the role of the cities in also, discussing and advancing nuclear disarmament and policies related to nuclear weapons. So I think there's even more voices that will come, and issues and content that could be discussed within the group. But I think we will definitely try to limit the goal of this group and think about what will be our target audience and what should be the final product that will make a meaningful change, or at least make some recommendations that can lead to some kind of improvement. Yeah. So are you okay in general with this proposal that we send the recordings to everyone? And I very much welcome some additional comments that will come after, sending the recordings, and also me summarizing the meetings. And then around September, early September, I will propose some next steps. So maybe that could be another opportunity for you to respond in this, if this is the right way to go, or make some suggestion that maybe we should divide the issues into different group or different sections, and we could take it from there to organize a workshop that will give us more time at discussing particular issues. So this is the plan. Okay. All right. Thank you so much for today. I don't know if Rebecca wants to say something to just close the meeting.
I just want to
Otherwise,
say thank you so much all for your time and your wisdom and experience. I think this has been a really rich conversation, and I'm really looking forward to seeing where this all goes. So thank you.
okay.
And thanks Agnes for bringing together just an amazing group of people.
Yeah.
You all are doing fantastic work. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's think a bit more deeply about what we can achieve together. Thank you so much.